Ah, the good life according to Friederich Nietzsche. So first we're going to address the question, who is Friederich Nietzsche? Then we're going to talk about his theory of the good life, his critique of Western morality, his famous doctrine that God is dead, and then we'll end with a conclusion. So who is Friederich Nietzsche? Friederich Nietzsche is a 19th century German existentialist philosopher. And he is famous for his pronouncement, God is dead, as well as for his passionate and emotional style of writing. Now we say that he's an existentialist philosopher, so what does that mean? So existentialism is a school of philosophy that is concerned with the meaning of life, the purpose of death, and individual self-expression. So existentialism is all about individual people making sense of their own lives and thinking for themselves. It's a highly individualist philosophy. Now, what is interesting about Nietzsche is that he initially trained to become a Lutheran minister, but then he lost his faith while he was in seminary. And Nietzsche's radical views on God, morality, and the meaning of life deeply influenced postmodern philosophers in the 20th century. So he's kind of a big wig in 20th and even 21st century philosophical movements. So with this in mind, what is Nietzsche's theory of the good life, and what is this Übermensch figure that keeps appearing in our slides? Well, we will talk about this. So here is Nietzsche's good life theory in a nutshell. Nietzsche argues that the purpose of human life is to excel to individual greatness, to fully express our unique talents and abilities. And to do this, one has to acknowledge and cultivate what he calls the will to power. And what is the will to power? It is a vital energy that drives human beings to express their individual strengths and talents and to ultimately dominate the environment. So it is that driving force that gets us out of bed and makes us want to become number one and to accomplish things and to become the full person that we were meant to be. And the will to power seeks to express what Nietzsche calls the amor fati, or the yes to life. So not the no to life, but yes to living a fully exhilarating life. And this will to power is boundless and amoral. That is, it breaks through boundaries and it doesn't have a conscience. It just goes, goes, goes. Now, when an individual lives according to his or her will to power, he or she becomes what Nietzsche calls an Übermensch. Now, what is an Übermensch? The Übermensch is a German term which is usually translated as overman and sometimes superman. And the Übermensch is an individual who overcomes adversity and social moral pressures in order to express the will to power and ultimately create his or her own purpose in life. So the Übermensch is the one who accepts their will to power, they live according to what the will to power wants, and they create their own purpose and meaning in life. Now, some examples of Übermensch according to Nietzsche would be people like Napoleon, right? Napoleon lived according to his will to power. He was ambitious and he started from nothing and eventually became, the emperor, of France in his lifetime. Also figures like Martin Luther, that is, Nietzsche we're going to find, is an atheist, and yet he still kind of admires Martin Luther because he kind of rebelled against, authority, in this case, against the Roman Catholic Church. And again, interestingly, Nietzsche has kind of a love-hate relationship with Jesus. On the one hand, he disagrees with Jesus' teachings, but at the same time, he also admires Jesus as an Übermensch, or one who challenged the religious authorities of his day. Now, here's the thing. The Übermensch is a rare individual. That is, for Nietzsche, most people live according to what he calls a herd mentality and merely follow socially acceptable norms without really questioning them. So here's a question. Why aren't more people living according to the will to power? For Nietzsche, it is because people are brainwashed into believing that we should feel ashamed of the will to power, that it is evil and that it should be suppressed. And Nietzsche blames what he calls Western morality. And Western morality is a system of morality which is influenced by the Greek and Judeo-Christian traditions, and it emphasizes selflessness and moral and spiritual purity. So this is Western morality in a nutshell. That human beings are created in the image of God, and that because of this, human beings have to follow certain like holy moral laws. Like, for example, Jesus teaching to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, which for Nietzsche is highly unnatural, right? Nature teaches us to hate our enemies, not to love them. And lastly, Western morality teaches us to kind of deny the pleasures and desires of this world so that we can prepare ourselves for eternal bliss in the next world. So according to Nietzsche, these values preached by Western morality castrates the will to power. And he refers to Western morality as a slave morality because it advocates the interests of the weak and condemns the interests of the strong. And this slave morality creates feelings of guilt, guilt from ambition, guilt of anger, guilt of desire. And so these Western Greek Judeo-Christian moral beliefs are ultimately oppressive in Nietzsche's view because they are contrary to human nature. So ultimately, the slave morality of the Greek Judeo-Christian tradition suppresses the will to power, and we feel guilty for the deep yearnings of this will to power to fully express our strengths, talents, and desires, that is, to be fully human. However, for Nietzsche, as a late 19th century figure, he argues that the era of slave morality is coming to an end because God is dead. So Nietzsche argues that the advent of modern science and industry has made the Judeo-Christian God unbelievable, and that ultimately Western peoples will come to the realization that God does not exist, that God is a myth and a fiction. And Nietzsche teaches that there are two reactions that people will have to the death of God. One, some people will just ignore God's death and continue to believe in God because it's comforting to them. And as a result, they will remain Untermensch or undermen. However, there will be a select few people who will rejoice in God's death and finally throw off the oppressive shackles of Western morality, and those are the people who will become Übermensch or overmen. And again, for Nietzsche, only a select few individuals will accept God's death and live a deeply fulfilling existence as Übermensch, whereas the majority of people's society will remain Untermensch, people who just deny that God is dead. And to be an Übermensch for Nietzsche is the best and most exciting form of living because you are truly living up to your potential and striving to become number one. So one question that I have for you is, who would you consider to be Übermensch in our own society? Would these people, who I'm sure you recognize, would they be considered to be Übermensch in Nietzsche's eyes? All right, so in conclusion, for Nietzsche, one is living a good life when they live according to the will to power. But most people do not live according to the will to power because they have been brainwashed by Western slave morality. And the death of God will bring forth a new era where rare individuals will once again have the courage to live as Übermensch.